On streams, I've mentioned how the comic book community, specifically referencing writers, shot callers within some of the mainstream comics, and how it took a just an absolute turn for the worse after damn net took a turn for the worse after Trump won. Trump beat out Hillary, and we saw this just shift. And it was a big. This shift didn't start just a few years ago. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm saying that Trump winning that election sent a lot of people within the comic book community over the edge. And back in the gap, there wasn't this thing called social media, right? And now social media is as popular as it's ever been, and you have so many people that utilize it. But not only that, more so you can see the thoughts because they put them out there of your favorite actors, writers, yada yada. They have their blue check marks verified, and you can see them because they have no problem putting themselves out there. They're sort of what social media. I mean, there's nobody wants to live in secrecy anymore. Everybody puts their thoughts out there. It's not even wearing it on their sleeves. They're shouting it from the fucking mountaintops at this point. And you can notice that once that election popped off, a lot of people went over the deep end, right? People that we may have knew were sort of leftists, maybe. It's a difference between being that and just being a completely deranged leftist. And that's what we got out of the Trump election. Out of the 2016 election, excuse me. And him winning. That's what we got. We got a bunch of deranged leftists out of that. Dramatizing, virtue signaling. And unfortunately, people have used the clout that they've been given. Certainly in the case of actors, you can see people like Chris Evans. Chris Evans is an insufferable leftist. He was not always like this. Certainly when he took the role of Captain America early in the decade, he was not like this at all. Now he's just, you go to his Twitter and it's filth, yo. That guy's out of his mind. And I mean, that's, say what you will, that's kind of my opinion on a lot of people in Hollywood now at this point. And they've amplified this idea when you consider all of them seem to have the same exact political thoughts. You got those outliers there, but even with a guy like Chris Pratt, that sends them like he's an outlier, right? Everybody else, for the most part, lock, stock, mainstream leftism, they buck dance for whatever Democrats running that particular election. So there's no sort of diversity in thought by any means. It doesn't seem, at least. But Trump winning sent a lot of these guys, including Chris Evans, over the fucking edge, and they're just insufferable at this point. Now, the problem with that is, again, he's bouncing. He's getting his clout that he has gained off of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So basically piggybacking off of what's been handed to him in Captain America. Same thing happens with a lot of the writers. Even writers that have been classic writers and have been writing for decades. Jerry Conway, he co-created The Punisher. He is an insufferable leftist. I did a video about him and some of his thoughts and how he's so worried about sticking it to people that are like these sort of anti-social justice types that he's willing to, he puts that out there. When the whole Jane Foster Thor thing came out, he's like, oh, well, the thing I love about this is that it's just a big fuck you to all the people who didn't like this. Like, dog, what sort of writer says shit like that? But that's his motive. His motive is sticking it to them. And that's sort of what we've gotten from a lot of writers. And it's not just anti-Trumpism, which you're getting some of that. Lois Lane, Greg Rucka is another guy who's been writing for a while that you guys were familiar with. Lois Lane issue 1, I've done a video on this. It's just a predictable narrative in which you have basically Lois Lane grilling what looks to be Sarah Sanders, former was the press secretary, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the White House spokesperson. And talking about refugees, child separation and shit. It's like, dude, this comic book reads like I'm watching CNN or more so MSNBC. But that's where we're at with it. And what we're seeing, and this is the problem, is that the creativity has gone completely out the window. So whereas yes, you have people that had these different affiliations throughout the years, but they weren't so on the nose. They could write in metaphors and analogies and stuff like that, where there was multiple interpretations for certain things. They weren't just copying and pasting whatever narrative was going on at the time and just slapping it in the comic book. For the most part, certainly on divisive issues, and by divisive issues I mean where you can find people that are on one side and on the other side, and back in the Gap, you could see that there was multiple sort of interpretations for that particular subject matter, and they were being depicted as protagonists. That's out the window, where it's just mainstream leftism is the hero, right? You're not going to see in nowadays shape and form, like, for example, mainstream conservative in a mainstream comic or mainstream conservative view, more so, being depicted in a comic book in a positive light when it comes to the big two. It's just not going to happen for the most part. That's just where we're at with it. Now, you don't have to look hard to find that mainstream leftism being depicted as the positive thing. But that's where we're at with comic books at this day and age. And that it's such a heavy lean on one way. And the Trump shit sent everybody over the edge to where now they're so on the nose and they have to use the art to try to depict their ideology, which is all it is. It's an extension of themselves, which is why you're getting all of these corny ass diversity efforts and all of this shit, because people now think that it's up to them to try to use this as an extension of their nonsensical ideals, which is where they're at with it. And that's why you're getting some of the books that you're getting, or some of the storylines and some of the narratives, and just the overall theme, right, that is being promoted now, where the storyline and the classic, the more so the legacy of some of these characters, the established characters, are being put on the back burner, and what's being put on the forefront is just, again, mainstream leftism and whatever ideology surrounds that. And it's very unfortunate, and this is why I believe comics have taken a hit. And it's getting worse, because now people saw the Trump thing, and now they're all angry and pissed off, and they put all their thoughts out there on Twitter, and you're a damn fool if you don't think that that's going to bleed into the comics. And that's exactly what's happened. And I've watched it. I've watched it get progressively worse. Certainly, I mean, it just amplified, man, accelerated, if you will, once it was apparent that Donald Trump was going to be president. They lost their fucking mind. And now even some of the classic writers don't even know what they're doing anymore, and they're so worried about signaling. They're so worried about anti-Trumpism messages, not only in the comic books, but just overall anti-conservatism, anti-non-leftism. Like me, I'm an anarcho-capitalism and libertarian. They're not going to depict any of that shit in the comic book. It's not happening. It's not happening, bro. Certainly not as you may find some outliers, but for the most part, the heroism is not going to be that. It's not going to be, the protagonist is not going to be this staunch, like, person that is not a leftist. It's not even about being against conservatism. That's part of it. But it's about just not being a leftist, right? That's sort of where we're at. You know, they despise anything. Like me, I can criticize Trump all day long, which I do. But they don't like me just because I'm not aligned with them. But that's where we're at. And that's one thing that I've noticed with the rise of social media in combination with that Trump election and him winning that 2016 election. It just sent so many comic book writers and just people affiliated with comic book material, again, including the actors, it just sent them over the edge. And now they are feeling like, okay, I have to use my clout that's been given to me by way of the characters that they didn't create for the most part, and some even created some of them, and they went on over the deep end as well. But it's the same with the other characters, or the other actors and the other, writers and stuff like that have certainly grown in popularity over the last decade. It's like you can pinpoint that, and you can just see storylines start going into straight shit after that. And it's not to say that they haven't been going to shit. I'm just saying there's something that I noticed, and I think a lot of people, if you just think about it, like, damn, yeah, once he won the 2016 election, these guys went fucking crazy, man. And that's unfortunate. And this is why I hate politics, man. Politics brings out the worst of people, man. It really does.